The smell of rosemary and slow-cooked pot roast usually filled the Clark dining room on Sundays, a comforting aroma that had signaled family and routine for decades. Eleanor, at 66, had orchestrated countless such dinners, her hands shaping the rhythm of their home for 43 years of marriage to Arthur. Today, however, the familiar scent felt like a bitter mockery. It was Arthur, her husband, who shattered the illusion of domesticity with a voice devoid of warmth, cutting through the clinking of silverware and the gentle hum of conversation. "From now on," he announced, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond Eleanor, "you sleep in the garage." Eleanor's fork, laden with a tender piece of pot roast and a roasted potato, froze mid-air. The sudden, stark demand created a vacuum, sucking all sound from the room. The only thing she could hear was the frantic thump of her own heart. Across the polished mahogany table, their son, Thomas, shifted uneasily in his chair, his shoulders hunching slightly. Beside him, his wife, Serafina, a woman barely half Thomas's age at 34, could not entirely suppress a triumphant smirk that played at the corners of her lips. She looked directly at Eleanor, a glint of cruel satisfaction in her eyes, enjoying the shock she expected to see. But the shock never came. Instead, as the initial jolt subsided, a curious clarity settled over Eleanor, a profound, almost peaceful understanding that had been missing for years. It was as if a veil had been lifted, revealing a truth she had subconsciously avoided. She slowly lowered her fork, the pot roast still dangling, and placed it neatly beside her plate. Then, she looked up, meeting Arthur's indifferent stare with a calm that surprised even herself. "Okay," she said, her voice steady and quiet. Arthur's meticulously composed expression faltered. Serafina's smirk vanished, replaced by a flicker of confusion. They had clearly anticipated a storm of tears, a flurry of protests, a desperate plea for explanation. "Just okay?" Arthur demanded, his voice tightening with unexpected irritation, as if her placid response had robbed him of the dramatic confrontation he had craved. Eleanor didn't answer immediately. She simply looked at Arthur, truly looked at him, for the first time in what felt like forever. His eyes, once full of ambition and a charming, if demanding, affection, now held nothing but cold contempt. 43 years of her life, dedicated to him, to their son, to building his business, Clark Holdings, from a small venture into a formidable enterprise. She had been his sounding board, his financial manager, his silent partner, sacrificing her own aspirations without a single complaint. All that dedication, now repaid with an order to sleep in the garage. Serafina, recovering her composure, leaned forward, her voice dripping with mock reasonableness. "It's very reasonable, Eleanor. Honestly, with the shelving unit and that small window, it's practically a studio apartment. Quite private, really." The condescension in her tone was palpable, an insult, thinly veiled as kindness. Thomas, her husband, 28 years her senior, and looking suddenly very old, eagerly nodded his head. "Mother always said she liked having her own space," he chimed in, a hollow lie that rang painfully false. Eleanor didn't correct him. What was the point? Her silence was a shield, a silent promise to herself. Arthur, still visibly off balance by Eleanor's serene acceptance, moved quickly to regain control. "My lawyers will be in touch on Tuesday morning," he stated, his voice regaining its usual brusqueness, "to discuss financial restructuring." The phrase hung in the air, heavy with unspoken threats. Serafina, seizing the opportunity to further dismiss Eleanor, waved a dismissive hand. "Don't you worry your pretty little head about any of that, Eleanor. We'll take care of everything." The words were meant to belittle, to strip Eleanor of her intelligence and agency, particularly her formidable financial acumen, but for Eleanor, they merely confirmed what she had suspected for months. With a heavy heart, yet a surprisingly light step, Eleanor rose from the table. She gathered her purse, her movements deliberate, almost ceremonial. As she walked out of the dining room and down the hall, she heard a burst of relieved laughter from behind her, followed by Serafina's high-pitched giggle. They were celebrating her banishment. The sound solidified the anger that had been simmering beneath her calm exterior. transforming it into a hard, cold resolve. She walked past the kitchen, past the sitting room, and out the back door towards the detached garage. It was a space she rarely entered, usually reserved for Arthur's classic car and various neglected tools. Now, it was her domain. As she stepped inside, the chill air and the scent of oil and dust wrapped around her. The single bare bulb cast long, distorted shadows. She sat heavily on an old wooden crate, the laughter from the house still echoing in her mind. The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. For the past 6 months, a growing sense of unease had gnawed at her. Arthur's sudden, lengthy private phone calls, always ending abruptly when she entered the room. Seraphina's hushed whispers with Thomas, their eyes darting towards Eleanor whenever she passed. The hidden bank statements, tucked away in Arthur's locked desk drawer, a drawer that had always been open to her. The changed passwords on their shared investment accounts, forcing her to ask Arthur for access, only to be met with vague excuses. She remembered walking in on Seraphina rummaging through Arthur's old files in his study, her face flushed with guilt as she claimed to be tidying up. She remembered Seraphina, with sickening familiarity, calling Arthur Daddy Clark during a phone conversation, dismissing Eleanor's long-standing financial expertise to someone on the other end. Oh, Eleanor wouldn't understand this. Daddy Clark. She'd purred. Eleanor had simply walked away then, feigning deafness, but the words had lodged themselves deep in her memory. Another vivid memory surfaced, overhearing Arthur on a hushed call weeks ago, discussing a Glenda problem with someone named Patterson. The tone urgent and worried, and just last week, she'd seen Seraphina stealthily photographing documents on Arthur's office desk with her phone, her movements precise and quick. Each incident, seemingly minor on its own, now coalesced into a clear, damning picture. In the dim light of the garage, Eleanor reached into her pocket. Her fingers closed around a small, sleek device, a burner phone she had purchased months ago, hidden away for just such a contingency. Her thumb brushed across the screen, finding a contact she had stored under a code name. She pressed the call button. The number belonged to Clara Davis, an attorney specializing in complex financial cases, whom Eleanor had discreetly consulted several months prior, when the first seeds of doubt had been planted. As the phone rang, a single tear of pure, unadulterated rage traced a path down Eleanor's cheek, hardening her resolve. This was not an end. It was a beginning. Monday morning arrived with a harsh, unfeeling dawn. Eleanor woke on the makeshift cot in the garage, her body aching from the unfamiliar mattress and the persistent chill that seeped through the concrete floor. Yet, despite the physical discomfort, her mind was remarkably sharp, clear of the fog of denial that had often clouded her thoughts in recent months. The air inside the garage, thick with the scent of old oil and damp earth, was a stark contrast to the lavender-scented sheets of her marital bed. She dressed in a sensible wool dress, chosen for its warmth more than its style, and made her way to the main house. As she entered, the subtle changes that had crept into her home over the past months were glaringly obvious. The new, overly modern throw pillows on the living room sofa, the aggressively vibrant artwork on the walls, the scent of a different, sweeter coffee brewing in the kitchen. All were hallmarks of Seraphina's pervasive influence. This was no longer just her house. It was Seraphina's domain, a territory she had subtly, then brazenly, conquered. Arthur was already at the breakfast nook, nursing a cup of coffee. He looked up as Eleanor entered, and for a fleeting moment, she thought she saw a flicker of guilt in his eyes. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by his usual stiff, almost formal demeanor. "Eleanor," he greeted, his voice flat. "Victoria Thorne and her associate, Bethany, will be here at 10. They're from Thorne and Thorne." He paused, taking a sip of coffee. "Just some updates to our financial arrangements, property transfers, that sort of thing. Nothing complicated." Eleanor felt a cold dread trickle down her spine at the mention of property transfers. She thought of Clara's warning from the previous night, her urgent instructions. Playing the part she needed to play, Eleanor adopted a slightly bewildered expression. Should I have my own lawyer present?" she asked, her voice deliberately soft, tinged with a hint of concern. The question visibly startled Arthur. His coffee cup clinked against the saucer as he set it down with unnecessary force. "Absolutely not," he scoffed, recovering quickly. "It's entirely unnecessary. These are just routine adjustments. You know how meticulous Thorne is with documentation." He offered a practiced, dismissive smile, the kind he reserved for clients he wanted to reassure without actually informing. "We've been with them for years." He finished his coffee, then rose, striding towards her. He bent down and pressed a dry, superficial kiss to her forehead. "I'm off to the office," he announced, already halfway out the door. He clearly believed she was still his obedient, unquestioning wife, a woman who would simply nod and sign whatever was placed before her. The thought sent a fresh wave of ice through Eleanor. The moment the front door clicked shut, signifying Arthur's departure, Eleanor moved. Her fingers fumbled slightly as she retrieved the burner phone from the pocket of her dress, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She dialed Clara Davis's number, her breath catching in her throat. "Clara? It's Eleanor," she whispered into the phone, her voice barely audible. "He just left. He said 2 lawyers, Victoria Thorne and Bethany, will be here at 10, for financial arrangements and property transfers. And he said, I don't need my own lawyer." Clara's response was immediate and sharp, devoid of her usual calm, lawyerly tone. "Eleanor, listen to me very carefully." Clara's voice cut through the phone, urgent and precise. "Do not sign anything today. You hear me? Do not sign a single document, not even a receipt for coffee. You sign nothing, absolutely nothing, until I have personally reviewed every single piece of paper." Eleanor's grip tightened on the phone. "But what if he gets suspicious?" "He's been so careful to hide everything." She could hear the tremor in her own voice, the fear she was trying so hard to suppress. "Suspicion is a small price to pay for keeping your financial future intact, Eleanor," Clara retorted, her tone firm. "We need to protect your assets before they disappear entirely. This is moving faster than I anticipated." She paused, then asked, "Can you come to my office this afternoon, say, 3 o'clock, and tell me everything you've observed? Every whisper, every glance, every discrepancy." Eleanor recounted the unsettling details. Serafina's constant presence, her whispers with Thomas, the hidden bank statements, the changed passwords, Serafina's brazen rummaging through Arthur's files, her calling him Daddy Clark to an unknown party, and the mysterious Glenda problem Arthur had discussed with Patterson. She even mentioned Serafina photographing documents. Clara listened patiently, interjecting with sharp, pertinent questions. When Eleanor finished, Clara sighed, a sound of grave concern. "Eleanor," she began, her voice grave, "what you're describing sounds like a textbook case. A coordinated effort to isolate you, financially and legally. They're trying to strip you of your assets, likely using Serafina to help facilitate it, possibly even setting her up to benefit directly. It's an old tactic, but a highly effective one if the victim isn't prepared." A chilling realization washed over Eleanor. "So, this meeting today? It's not about routine adjustments?" she whispered, the words barely escaping her lips. "No, Eleanor," Clara confirmed, her voice grim. "This meeting is about getting you to sign away your rights to everything you own, your share of the business, your marital property, your future." Eleanor's gaze fell upon a framed photograph on the mantelpiece, a picture taken at Thomas and Serafina's wedding. Only a few years ago. Serafina, radiant in white, clinging to Thomas. Arthur, beaming, looking every inch the proud father. And Eleanor, standing slightly apart, a polite smile fixed on her face, already a little out of focus, already beginning to fade from the picture. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. They weren't just taking her place in the bed, they were taking her entire life. "So, what do I do?" Eleanor asked, her voice now steady, the fear replaced by a cold, righteous anger. "You play along," Clara instructed, her voice crisp and strategic. "You play along until this afternoon. Be the confused, compliant wife they expect you to be. Nod. Agree. Ask innocent questions if you must, but commit nothing. Remember everything they say, every detail, every document. Pretend you're absorbing it, but don't internalize their lies. You are gathering intelligence, Eleanor. Be smart. Be strong. And do not, under any circumstances, sign anything. The phone call ended, leaving Eleanor alone in the silence of the encroaching house. She glanced at the kitchen clock. It was 8:30 a.m. She had an hour and a half to prepare for her impending assault, an hour and a half to transform from the compliant wife into a silent observer, a gatherer of evidence, a woman preparing for war. The game had begun, and Eleanor Clark was finally ready to play. The next hour and a half passed in a blur of carefully constructed normalcy. Eleanor moved through the house, dusting a mantelpiece that didn't need it, rearranging a bowl of fruit with meticulous care. Each mundane task was a deliberate anchor, grounding her in the present while her mind raced, a furious current beneath the calm surface. She catalogued every injustice, every dismissed instinct, every swallowed word from the past months. The humiliation of the garage, the insidious whispers, Seraphina's triumphant smirk, they were not just memories, but fuel for the fire of her growing resolve. She thought about her 4 decades with Arthur, her unwavering trust, her quiet submission to his every decision. She had managed their household, balanced the books for his business, raised their son, all while maintaining an appearance of graceful compliance. She had believed this was the foundation of a strong marriage, a partnership built on mutual respect. Now, with brutal clarity, she understood. Her compliance had been seen as weakness, her trust as stupidity, her quiet competence as an opportunity to be exploited. At precisely 9:30 a.m., a sleek, dark sedan, gleaming under the weak morning sun, glided into their driveway. 2 figures emerged. Victoria Thorne, impeccably dressed, her silver hair pulled back in a severe, no-nonsense bun, her sharp features hinting at an intellect honed by years of legal battles. Trailing slightly behind her was her younger associate, Bethany, clutching a slim briefcase and a professional-looking portfolio. Moments later, Arthur's luxury car pulled up beside them, a perfectly timed arrival that underscored the coordinated nature of the assault. Eleanor felt a sickening lurch in her stomach, seeing the 3 of them converge, like a pack of wolves circling their prey. Eleanor met them at the front door, summoning her best Eleanor smile, a practiced expression of gentle hospitality, a veneer of harmlessness designed to convey insignificance. She embodied the gray-haired, unassuming wife they undoubtedly expected, a woman whose opinion wouldn't matter, whose resistance would be negligible. She offered polite greetings, her voice soft, almost deferential. Victoria Thorne's eyes, sharp and assessing, swept over Eleanor with a clinical efficiency. Eleanor could feel the lawyer's quick evaluation, a swift calculation that surely concluded, pushover. The assessment was exactly what Eleanor wanted them to make. As she busied herself making coffee in the kitchen, the clatter of ceramic mugs and the hiss of the espresso machine providing a welcome distraction, Eleanor caught her reflection in the darkened window above the sink. The woman staring back was not the meek, confused person she presented to the world. Her eyes, though a little tired, held an alert, calculating glint. Her jaw, though relaxed, possessed a subtle firmness. 43 years of living and observing, of managing finances and people, of silently absorbing the intricacies of Arthur's business, all of it had forged a sharp mind, and she was ready to use every bit of that accumulated knowledge against them. Back in the dining room, the comfortable family space had been transformed. Victoria Thorne had already taken Eleanor's usual seat at the head of the table, a clear declaration of dominance. Documents, thick stacks of them, were spread out across the polished surface, transforming the familiar setting into a cold, efficient war room. Victoria gestured with a pen towards the chair at the far end, almost an afterthought. "Eleanor, if you'd like to sit here." It was the position of least power, the furthest removed from the center of the discussion, a subtle yet deliberate act of choreographing her humiliation. Eleanor walked over and sat quietly, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her posture outwardly defeated. Inside, however, her mind was buzzing, dissecting every move, every word, planning her counterattack with a precision born of years of quiet observation. Victoria Thorne began, her voice a practiced blend of professional authority and false kindness. "Now, Eleanor," she started. Her gaze softened just enough to be condescending. "What we're going to discuss today is really for your own protection. Arthur, bless his heart, is simply looking out for you." Eleanor played her part perfectly, nodding dutifully, her expression a mix of gentle understanding and slight bewilderment. Beside Victoria, Arthur sat rigid, his face a mask of barely contained impatience. He clearly wanted to get this over with, to have Eleanor sign on the dotted line and disappear from his immediate concerns. Victoria continued, her narrative unfolding smoothly. "As we get older, Eleanor," she explained, leaning forward slightly, "the complexities of financial management can become quite overwhelming. It's a natural progression, really, and with Arthur's demanding schedule, it's simply too much for you to manage alone, isn't it?" Eleanor merely offered another soft nod, allowing the patronizing words to wash over her, noting them for later. She was not overwhelmed. She had managed their entire financial portfolio, the household budgets, and parts of Arthur's business accounts for decades with meticulous care and impeccable records. Bethany, the younger associate, stepped forward, spreading several documents across the table. Her voice, though softer than Victoria's, carried the same thinly veiled condescension. "So, we've outlined a simplified arrangement," she began, pointing to various paragraphs. "Arthur will take on full financial responsibility for all assets, accounts, and investments. And to ensure your comfort and independence, Eleanor, you will receive a fixed allowance of $800 per month." She looked up, a small, patronizing smile on her face, as if she were bestowing a generous gift. $800. Eleanor felt a flicker of white-hot fury, quickly suppressed. $800 a month for a woman who had helped build a multi-million-dollar empire. It was an insult of epic proportions. Eleanor, maintaining her innocent facade, tilted her head slightly. "And what about the house?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as if she were almost too timid to voice the question. Victoria Thorne smiled, a predatory gleam in her eyes. "The house, Eleanor," she explained, her voice smooth as silk, "will be transferred into a trust. Arthur will be the primary trustee, of course, ensuring its continued upkeep and your living arrangements. It's simply the most sensible approach for long-term planning." Eleanor nodded again, her gaze sweeping over the documents, memorizing their layouts, their titles. Her home, her sanctuary, reduced to a living arrangement within a trust, with Arthur and, by extension, Serafina in full control. The wolves had descended, and they were circling, ready to devour everything she had built, everything she was. But Eleanor was no longer a sheep. Eleanor maintained her quiet, attentive posture, letting the information wash over her, meticulously cataloging each detail. She tilted her head, a picture of innocent concern. "And what happens if Arthur, God forbid, were to pass away before me?" she asked, her voice a soft murmur, playing the worried wife. Bethany, the younger associate, offered a smooth, practiced response. "The trust is carefully structured to provide for your continued care, Eleanor. It ensures you'll be placed in an appropriate facility, tailored to your needs, should that unfortunate event occur." The words were delivered with a sterile professionalism that chilled Eleanor to the bone. An appropriate facility. Not her home, not with her son, but a pre-selected institution, where she would be tucked away and forgotten. Then came the true revelation. Victoria Thorne, with a flourish, pulled out a final, single document, distinct from the stacks of financial papers. It was a power of attorney. "And finally," Victoria announced, her voice losing its edge of false kindness and becoming purely authoritative, "this document designates Arthur as your sole medical and financial power of attorney, should you, Eleanor, become incapacitated." Eleanor's blood turned to ice. She stared at the words on the page, the legalese blurring for a moment. Incapacitated. This wasn't merely about taking her money or her home. This was about stripping her of her autonomy, her very ability to decide for herself. This was a document designed to give Arthur absolute, complete control over her life, her body, her mind. Her voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. "What kind of incapacitation?" she asked, her gaze lifting to meet Victoria's, a flicker of genuine alarm piercing her carefully constructed facade. Arthur leaned forward then, a look of exaggerated, husbandly concern plastered across his face. "Well, honey," he began, his voice dripping with condescension. "You've been so forgetful lately, haven't you? Getting confused about simple things, losing your keys, forgetting appointments. It's just a precaution, to make sure you're protected." The veiled accusation, the thinly disguised gaslighting, hung heavy in the air. Victoria Thorne quickly chimed in, reinforcing Arthur's narrative. "The important thing, Eleanor," she said, her tone brisk and decisive, "is that everything is in place to protect you and your interests when these issues inevitably worsen. It's a proactive step, a very responsible one." Eleanor listened, her mind reeling. They weren't just planning for her natural decline, they were planning to cause it, to accelerate it, to manipulate events, until she truly was deemed incapacitated. They were planning to erase her completely, not just from the family ledger, but from existence itself. The sinister depth of their plot hit her with the force of a tidal wave. A cold, hard clarity descended. She had to buy time. "I need to think about this," Eleanor said slowly, her voice still quiet but with an underlying firmness that was subtly out of character. It was the first crack in her compliant demeanor, a deliberate shift in their predetermined timeline. Arthur's mask slipped instantly, his eyes narrowed, and a flash of raw anger distorted his features. "Eleanor," he snapped, his voice tight with impatience. "We've explained everything. It's all very straightforward. There's nothing to think about." Eleanor met his furious gaze, refusing to back down. "Perhaps for you," she said, her voice still soft, but with a new edge. "But these are very important decisions. I would like to review everything. Could I please have until tomorrow morning to look over all these documents?" Victoria Thorne's brittle smile tightened, barely concealing her irritation. "Eleanor, there are certain time-sensitive elements at play here," she stated, gesturing vaguely towards the documents. "We're nearing the end of the fiscal quarter, and some tax advantages are expiring on October 31st. Delaying could be quite costly." It was a clear attempt to pressure her, to force her hand. Eleanor slowly stood up from the table, meeting Victoria's gaze directly. A little steel, barely perceptible, entered her voice. "Surely 24 hours isn't unreasonable for decisions this important, especially concerning my entire future. I just need a little time to process it all." Her polite but firm request hung in the sudden silence of the dining room. Arthur was seething, his jaw clenched, but he knew he couldn't push too hard without exposing the underlying coercion. Victoria Thorne, shrewd enough to recognize a slight shift in power, reassessed. She looked from Arthur's furious face to Eleanor's calm, unyielding expression. "Finally," she conceded. Her voice clipped. "Very well. We'll be in touch tomorrow morning to finalize everything." The words were delivered with a thinly veiled threat. The lawyers gathered their documents and left, their sleek black sedan disappearing down the driveway. Arthur, however, remained. The moment the front door closed, he whirled on Eleanor, his face contorted with fury. "What was that, Eleanor?" he snarled, his voice low and dangerous. "Are you trying to embarrass me, to make me look foolish in front of my lawyers?" Eleanor remained silent, watching him, absorbing his venom. "Honestly," he continued, pacing the dining room like a caged animal, "you haven't contributed anything to this marriage in years. You just existed. You think you have a say in anything? You're delusional." He stopped, pointing a finger at her. "Let me be very clear. You have no income, no assets in your name, no one who would take you in if I decided I'd had enough. Think about that, Eleanor. Think about where you'd go if I just cut you off. Tomorrow, you will sign those documents. Every single one. Or, you will regret it more than you can possibly imagine." As Arthur's words hung in the air, Eleanor finally understood the full, sinister scope of their plan. They weren't just taking her money or her home. They wanted her to disappear, to become a non-person, an incapacitated, nameless resident in an appropriate facility, with no legal standing, no voice, no future. Their plan was not just to divorce her, but to erase her. But they had underestimated her. They had mistaken her silence for submission, her patience for weakness. They had no idea what was coming for them. If you've been gripped by Eleanor's story so far, make sure you don't miss a single moment of her fight back. Stay with us for the next part, and please like, share, and subscribe to keep up with what happens next. That afternoon, the discreet hum of her car was a welcome companion as Eleanor drove across town to Clara Davis's law firm. The office was nestled on a quiet side street, far from the gleaming high-rises that housed Thorne and Thorne. It was a modest building, with a warm, inviting lobby, and the quiet efficiency of the paralegal who greeted her felt genuine. A stark contrast to the cold, calculating atmosphere of her morning encounter. In this unassuming space, Eleanor found a surprising sense of solace. Clara Davis met her in a comfortable consultation room, her expression serious as she gestured for Eleanor to sit. Clara listened with an unwavering intensity as Eleanor recounted every detail of the morning's meeting. Arthur's forced concern, Victoria Thorne's condescending explanations, Bethany's glib mention of an appropriate facility, and the insidious power of attorney document. Eleanor spoke slowly, methodically, reliving the betrayal but also solidifying her resolve with each spoken word. When Eleanor finished, Clara sighed, a grim look on her face. "Eleanor," she said, her voice grave, "what they are asking you to sign isn't just a simple asset transfer, it's a carefully crafted blueprint for elder abuse. This is a complete legal and financial takeover, designed to leave you with nothing, no control, no recourse." Eleanor felt a wave of nausea. "But if I don't sign tomorrow, what then?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Clara leaned forward, her eyes meeting Eleanor's directly. "If you refuse, they will likely proceed with having you declared incompetent. They'll use Arthur's fabricated claims of your forgetfulness and confusion as evidence of early-onset dementia. They'll bring in their own doctors, their own experts, and they will commit you to a facility. And once you're there, declared incapacitated, they'll sign everything on your behalf under that power of attorney they want you to grant him. It's a trap, Eleanor, designed to leave you utterly helpless." The words hit Eleanor with chilling accuracy. Commit her. The thought sent a jolt of terror through her, but it was quickly overshadowed by a surge of defiant anger. They truly intended to bury her alive. "But we fight back," Clara declared, her voice firm, pulling a thick, unassuming folder from her desk drawer. "And we start now." For the next 2 hours, the consultation room became Eleanor's sanctuary of resistance. Document after document was placed before her, each one a step towards reclaiming her life. Clara guided her through the legal maze, explaining each clause, each implication. Eleanor signed revocations of previous powers of attorney, nullifying any authority Arthur might have quietly obtained. She signed documents establishing new asset protection trusts, carefully structuring her independent wealth, making it untouchable by Arthur or his scheme. And finally, with a steady hand and a deep sense of purpose, she signed a new will, meticulously outlining her true wishes, leaving her significant personal assets, acquired through decades of smart investing, and her own family inheritance, to her other 3 children, her nieces and nephews, the children of her beloved late sister, who had always loved her unconditionally. As she signed each paper, Eleanor felt a profound shift within her. It was no longer just about reacting to their malice. She was taking control, asserting her will, meticulously dismantling their carefully constructed trap. A powerful surge of hope, cold and sharp, coursed through her veins. She was not a victim anymore. She was a strategist. Clara, observing the change in Eleanor's demeanor, emphasized the critical importance of absolute secrecy. "Eleanor," she warned, her voice low and serious, "if they realize you're fighting back before we're fully ready, they might accelerate their timeline. They might try to declare you incompetent even sooner, or find another way to isolate you. We need to buy ourselves time to gather all our evidence and prepare our counterattack. You must continue to play the part of the confused, compliant wife. It's vital." Before Eleanor left, Clara handed her a small, elegant pen. "This," Clara explained, "is a voice-activated recording device. Keep it with you at all times. If Arthur, or Serafina, or those lawyers make any threats, any admissions, any statements that could be construed as coercion, activate it. Every piece of evidence will be crucial when we go before a judge." Driving home through the late afternoon traffic, Eleanor felt a profound transformation. The weight of despair had lifted, replaced by a steely resolve. She was no longer just the banished wife, the woman slated for erasure. She was an avenging angel, armed with knowledge and a burgeoning plan. As she pulled into her driveway, the house, once a symbol of her life, now felt like a battleground. She knew she had to endure one more night under its roof, surrounded by those who plotted her destruction. The hardest part, she realized, wouldn't be the coldness of the garage or Arthur's contempt. The hardest part would be restraining herself, holding back the triumphant smile, the knowing glint in her eyes, from revealing just how badly they had underestimated her. The game had truly begun, and Eleanor was ready to play to win. Tuesday morning arrived under a sky the color of bruised plums, mirroring the storm brewing within Eleanor. She woke at precisely 5 a.m., not to the faint anxiety that usually preceded a confrontation, but with a sharp, almost exhilarating clarity. The hurricane, as Clara had called it, was upon them. This was the day Arthur expected her to sign away her life, her identity, her very existence. But Eleanor had a different script in mind. She maintained her normal morning routine with deliberate slowness, making coffee and preparing a modest breakfast. She even set a plate of perfectly scrambled eggs and 2 slices of buttered toast before Arthur at the breakfast nook, just as she had for 43 years. He sat hunched over his phone, oblivious to the meticulous ritual, his mind clearly preoccupied with the day's impending victory. Arthur finally looked up, dressed in his finest suit, ready for what he assumed would be a swift, triumphant execution of his plan. "Eleanor," he began, his voice devoid of any warmth, "I don't want a repeat of yesterday's performance. You're going to sign those papers today, right now, as soon as Victoria and Bethany arrive." He mispronounced her name, calling her Glenda, a slip that might once have stung, but now simply confirmed his detachment. Eleanor merely offered a soft, almost imperceptible nod. "Of course, Arthur," she replied, her voice gentle, even compliant. "I understand now." The words were a lie, but the sentiment behind them was true. She understood everything. Her marriage was truly over, reduced to a transaction. At 9:45 a.m., Eleanor excused herself to the master bathroom. Her reflection in the mirror showed a woman outwardly calm, but with eyes that held a depth of resolve Arthur would never comprehend. With steady hands, she retrieved the small, elegant pen Clara had given her. She activated the tiny recording device within it, the faint click barely audible. She then slipped it into the inner pocket of her cardigan, the small weight a comforting presence against her heart. She was ready. Precisely at 10 a.m., the doorbell chimed. Victoria Thorne and Bethany entered first, their expressions professional and unyielding. Moments later, Serafina swept in, her presence an unwelcome gust of expensive perfume and false warmth. "Good morning, Eleanor," Serafina chirped, her eyes sparkling with malicious glee. "Did you sleep well? I hear the garage can be quite chilly this time of year." Eleanor met Serafina's gaze evenly, her polite smile unwavering. "Very well, thank you," she replied, her voice betraying none of the fury that churned within. The implied insult, meant to deflate and diminish her, only strengthened her resolve. They gathered in the dining room once more, the scene chillingly identical to the previous day. The same stacks of documents, the same cold efficiency. Victoria Thorne took her place at the head of the table, pulling a sleek, expensive pen from her own briefcase and placing it next to the first document. "Shall we begin, Eleanor?" she asked, her voice oozing professional patience. She pushed the first document across the table. The dreaded power of attorney. Eleanor picked up the pen, her fingers surprisingly steady, She saw the collective relaxation wash over their faces. Arthur, Victoria, Bethany, and even Serafina, who had taken a seat in the corner, observing with smug satisfaction. They truly believed she was about to surrender. "Before I sign," Eleanor said, her voice soft, almost hesitant, "could you just give me a final explanation of the asset arrangement? I just want to be absolutely clear." It was a simple, innocent request, perfectly in character for the confused wife. Victoria Thorne, with an air of practiced authority, obliged. She reiterated the terms of the trust, Arthur's management of all assets, and how Thomas would assume responsibilities if Arthur were to predecease her. Eleanor nodded, absorbing every word, every nuance. "And my other children?" Eleanor asked, tilting her head slightly, feigning a moment of forgetfulness. "Are they mentioned anywhere?" Arthur snorted dismissively. "Eleanor, we've been over this," he interjected, his voice laced with impatience. "Thomas is the most financially responsible. He's the one who will handle everything. Your nieces and nephews have their own lives." He gave a dismissive wave of his hand, as if swatting away a fly. Eleanor continued to nod, then brought her attention back to the power of attorney document. "And the incapacitation clause," she murmured, her finger tracing the words on the page. "How exactly is incapacitation determined? What if someone convinced them I was incompetent when I wasn't?" She looked up, her gaze directly on Arthur, a hint of steel in her eyes he failed to recognize. Arthur's face flushed. "Eleanor, don't be paranoid," he scoffed, shifting uneasily. "It's a standard legal term." But Eleanor wasn't finished. She picked up the document again, her finger following the words she had meticulously reread last night. "This clause," she stated, her voice clear and steady, "states, including the right to authorize psychiatric treatment and commitment to care facilities." She looked directly at Serafina, whose smug smile had slowly vanished, replaced by a flicker of unease. Eleanor clarified, her voice now ringing with a dangerous calm. "So, what this means, correctly interpreted, is that Arthur, as my power of attorney, could have me committed to a psychiatric facility against my will, even if I'm perfectly healthy, correct?" She looked at Victoria Thorne, who remained impassive, betraying nothing. Arthur slammed his hand on the table, the unexpected sound echoing in the sudden silence. "Enough!" he bellowed, his face contorted in a mask of rage. "You're going to sign those papers right now, Eleanor." Eleanor held his furious gaze, her own eyes unwavering. "Or what, Arthur?" she asked, her voice a silk thread of defiance. "Or what? You'll throw me out? Have me committed? Claim I'm having a breakdown, just as you planned?" The words hung in the air, a shocking accusation that ripped through the carefully constructed facade of their deceit. The game, she realized, had just begun to truly unravel. Arthur's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated rage, a furious crimson that clashed violently with the expensive fabric of his suit. "How dare you!" he bellowed, his voice raw with indignation and disbelief. "You think you can just accuse me like that?" Serafina, meanwhile, looked absolutely murderous, her perfectly made-up face contorted, her eyes narrowed to slits of venomous fury. "You're just a bitter old woman with no friends, no money, and no options," she hissed, her voice sharp enough to cut. "No one would believe a word you say." Eleanor took a deep breath, letting their verbal assault wash over her without touching her resolve. Slowly, deliberately, she pushed her chair back and rose to her feet, her posture radiating a newfound strength. "Perhaps," she conceded, her voice calm, a stark contrast to their escalating hysteria. And then, with a flourish that startled them all, Eleanor reached into the inner pocket of her cardigan and pulled out a manila envelope, surprisingly thick. She didn't speak, but instead, with an air of quiet determination, spread its contents across the polished dining room table. The documents were copies, crisp and clear, bank statements revealing unauthorized transfers from joint accounts into accounts solely in Arthur's name, property deeds being quietly prepared, stripping her name from titles she had held for decades. Serafina's eyes darted from document to document, her face paling with each new revelation. Then came the most damning evidence, a document that sucked all the air from the room. It was a contract with a private psychiatric facility in Nevada, dated just 3 weeks ago. Attached to it was a pre-signed commitment order, bearing Arthur's signature. The Glenda problem. It was real. Victoria Thorne, the seasoned lawyer who had orchestrated this entire scheme, stared at the documents, her professional composure finally shattering. Her face was ashen, her eyes wide with undisguised shock. Arthur, his voice now a desperate whisper, demanded, Where did you get these?" He lunged forward, trying to gather the papers, but Eleanor swiftly moved to block him. "You really think after 43 years of marriage, I wouldn't know the combination to your locked cabinet?" Eleanor replied, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "Our wedding anniversary, Arthur, always was." The irony was exquisite. Serafina, regaining some of her ferocity, scoffed. "These are forgeries. Fabrications. No one will believe this." Eleanor merely raised an eyebrow. "Oh, I think they will, especially when I present them to the police, the Attorney General, and Adult Protective Services. I believe they take a rather dim view of elder abuse and attempted institutionalization for financial gain." The threat hung in the air, potent and undeniable. Before they could fully react, Eleanor reached into her pocket again, pulling out another, slightly thicker, manila envelope. "But wait," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous purr. "There's more." From this second envelope, she produced another set of documents. These were property deeds, but unlike the previous ones, these were solely in her name, meticulously filed. There were bank account transfers, not from their joint accounts, but from her own private, previously hidden, accounts. Accounts Arthur had no access to, nor even knowledge of. And finally, a meticulously prepared new will, leaving everything she owned to her beloved nieces and nephews, the children she had helped raise, children who loved her without condition or agenda. She laid them out for them to see, each document a carefully aimed arrow. "These," Eleanor announced, her voice resonating with power, "were all filed yesterday, with my attorney, Clara Davis, not your Patterson Chen. Along with these, I've also filed restraining orders against Arthur Clark and Serafina Clark, effective immediately." Arthur swayed, his face losing all color. You can't do this," he whispered. The bravado entirely gone from his voice. "I already have, Arthur," Eleanor replied, her voice cold and unyielding. "And there's more." She then held up her burner phone, its screen displaying the active recording app, showing the audio levels fluctuating in response to their panicked breaths. "Every word said in this room since 9:45 a.m. has been recorded, time-stamped, and backed up to a secure cloud server. The entire discussion, your threats, Serafina's accusations, Arthur's admission of my forgetfulness, all of it will be presented as evidence." Arthur slumped into his chair, defeat etched onto every line of his face. The fight had drained out of him. I had to, Eleanor," he mumbled, his voice hoarse. "The business. The debts. I just needed to protect what we have." Eleanor stared at him, her eyes filled with a lifetime of hurt and a hardening resolve. "No, Arthur," she corrected him, her voice a sharp blade. "You didn't need to protect what we have, you needed to steal what I have. There's a difference." She picked up the copies of the original property deeds she had laid out. "This house," she announced, her voice resonating with ownership, "was purchased with my inheritance from my grandparents, decades ago. It's solely mine. You and Serafina have until Friday to move out. If you're not gone, I'll have the locks changed and your belongings put on the curb." Then, Eleanor turned her gaze to Serafina, who looked utterly terrified. "And as for you, Serafina," she said, her voice dropping to a chillingly quiet tone, "Thomas's trust fund, which I established and funded with my family money, is now frozen. An investigation into fraudulent access and attempts to manipulate the trustee is already underway." Finally, she turned to Victoria Thorne, whose face was a mask of professional ruin. "As for you, Miss Thorne," Eleanor said, her voice filled with a quiet menace, "I hope your malpractice insurance is fully paid up. You're going to need it." With those words, Eleanor gathered her 2 envelopes, the pen recorder still active in her pocket, and walked out of the dining room. As she left, she heard Arthur's panicked whispers, Seraphina's desperate pleas, and Victoria Thorne's frantic, hushed legal advice. Eleanor closed the door behind her, the noise of their collapsing world muffled but not silenced. She pulled out her phone, no longer the burner, but her actual cell. The first call would be to her beloved nieces and nephews, the second, to Clara Davis, the third, to the police. Eleanor Clark, the subservient wife, the woman they had tried to erase, was gone forever. She was about to reclaim not just her assets, but her entire life. And she would do so with a vengeance. The 24 hours that followed Eleanor's dramatic unveiling in the dining room were, for her, profoundly satisfying. A serene calm had settled over her, a quiet strength that hummed just beneath the surface. She spent most of Wednesday morning with Clara Davis, methodically reviewing every detail of her legal protection plan, ensuring all her assets were secured and her future unassailable. Each step felt like a brick being placed in the foundation of her new, independent life. Meanwhile, the phone in her pocket vibrated incessantly with increasingly desperate messages. Arthur called 17 times, his voicemails ranging from furious threats to pathetic pleas. Seraphina sent a flurry of texts, each one more unhinged than the last, accusing Eleanor of being a spiteful witch. Thomas, their son, also called, his voice laced with confusion and distress over his suddenly frozen trust fund. Eleanor ignored them all. They could rage and beg. Their words held no power over her now. Later that afternoon, Clara confirmed that the restraining orders had been successfully served and were officially in effect, preventing Arthur or Seraphina from contacting Eleanor or accessing any of her assets or property. Clara also meticulously explained Eleanor's absolute legal right to revoke Arthur's name from the house deed, citing the historical financial records that clearly showed her inheritance as the sole funding source for the property's purchase. The house, indeed, was entirely hers. Regarding Thomas, Clara confirmed that his trust fund was completely frozen, pending a thorough investigation into fraudulent access and attempts to manipulate the trustee, namely Eleanor herself. A pang of guilt, sharp and unwelcome, pierced Eleanor's calm. She loved her son, despite his gaping weaknesses, his susceptibility to manipulation. She knew he was complicit, but also a victim of Seraphina's cunning. This was a battle she fought not just for herself, but for him, to free him from Seraphina's destructive influence. By Thursday morning, the physical manifestation of her reclaiming her life was complete. Eleanor had the locks on the house changed, her new keys a symbol of her sole ownership. Arthur's expensive truck still sat in the driveway, a silent testament to his sudden powerlessness, but he was locked out of what he had so recently considered his domain. He appeared that afternoon, haggard and unshaven, his expensive suit rumpled, his eyes bloodshot. He didn't even bother to ring the doorbell, just stood on the porch, staring at the freshly painted door. When Eleanor finally opened it, he looked utterly defeated. "Eleanor," he begged, his voice hoarse. "Please, I need access to the business accounts. Everything's collapsing. The debts. I need to save what we have. I'll sign anything you want. Just please, let me in." Eleanor looked at the man she had loved for over 4 decades, seeing not a husband, but a stranger. She remembered Sunday night, the chill of the garage, his cold command. "You already lost everything, Arthur," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "You just didn't realize it until now." Then, without another word, she closed the door, the click of the latch, final and irrevocable. Later that evening, Clara Davis called, her voice grave. "Eleanor," she began, "I have some disturbing news about Seraphina." Clara had leveraged her legal network to dig deeper into Seraphina's past, and what she uncovered was chilling. Her real name is Zara Matsumoto. She's been married twice before, both times to significantly older, wealthy men. Eleanor's heart hammered in her chest. "And what happened to them?" she asked, a knot forming in her stomach. Her first husband died in a suspicious car accident, leaving her everything. The second, Clara continued, her voice grim, was declared incompetent, committed to a private facility very similar to the one Arthur arranged for you, and died 6 months later from natural causes. She inherited everything from him, too. A wave of pure horror washed over Eleanor. "She was planning to kill me," she whispered, the realization hitting her with sickening force. "It's a pattern, Eleanor," Clara confirmed, "targeting elderly, wealthy individuals, isolating them, attempting to declare them incompetent, and then moving to more permanent solutions." The implications were stark and terrifying. Clara had already contacted the FBI. Elder abuse that crossed state lines, especially with such a sinister pattern, was a federal crime. This was no longer just a divorce case. It was escalating into a potential murder investigation. The very next day, Friday morning, 2 FBI agents, Morales and Kim, visited Eleanor. They were courteous, professional, and their faces confirmed Clara's findings. They laid out Serafina's extensive history, a horrifying pattern of preying on vulnerable, wealthy, elderly couples across several states. "Miss Clark," Agent Morales said, his expression serious, "we believe Serafina, or rather, Zara Matsumoto, may have been planning the same fate for you. We need your help to bring her to justice." They confirmed that Serafina had disappeared Tuesday night, vanishing without a trace. It was likely she was either fleeing, or worse, already seeking her next victim. Eleanor, her voice steady and resolute, agreed to testify. Later that day, Thomas arrived, hesitant and contrite. He looked utterly broken, his eyes red-rimmed and filled with remorse. "Mom," he choked out, "I'm so sorry. She fabricated everything. She manipulated me, made me believe you were the enemy, that you were trying to hurt Dad and me." He confessed to how Serafina had cleverly planted seeds of doubt, distorted facts, and played on his long-standing insecurities. Eleanor listened, her heart aching for her misguided son. She knew his love for her had never truly stopped, but he had been weak, easily swayed. She pulled him into a tender embrace, holding him tightly. "I know, Thomas," she whispered, tears finally blurring her vision. "I know. Forgiveness will take time, but we'll get through this. Together." 3 months later, the smell of roasted turkey and pumpkin pie filled the Clark house, no longer a bitter mockery but a genuine aroma of warmth and tradition. It was Thanksgiving, and Eleanor was making dinner, free from Arthur's nitpicking criticisms and Serafina's passive-aggressive suggestions. The house felt lighter, infused with an air of peace it hadn't known in years, perhaps decades. The divorce from Arthur was final, swift, and brutal for him. Stripped of most of his assets and left with a failing business drowning in debt, he was a shadow of his former self. A man aged 10 years in 3 months, utterly broken by the truth of Serafina's extensive manipulation and his own catastrophic choices. Eleanor felt neither satisfaction nor pity for him. He had made his bed, and now he lay in it. Justice, she recognized, was simply the natural consequence of his actions. As the afternoon sun slanted through the dining room windows, a flurry of excited voices announced the arrival of her real family. Her nieces and nephews, Sarah, Mark, and Emily, stepped through the front door, their faces beaming. These were the children of her beloved late sister, the ones she had secretly helped over the years, the ones who had loved her unconditionally. Sarah, her eyes wide with admiration, embraced Eleanor tightly. "Aunt Eleanor, you look absolutely wonderful," she exclaimed, genuinely surprised. "And you're actually smiling." The constant tension that had gripped Eleanor's face for so long had vanished, replaced by a radiant, authentic joy. Mark, ever the boisterous one, lifted her off her feet in a bear hug. "My warrior woman," he boomed, laughing, taking down a serial killer and sending Dad packing. "You're a legend." Emily, always the thoughtful one, held up a bottle of champagne. "To freedom." "Aunt Eleanor," she declared, pouring celebratory flutes, "you are officially the most badass 66-year-old I know." They gathered around the very same dining table where Eleanor had been humiliated just months prior, now laden with a feast she had prepared with love. As she looked at their smiling faces, their genuine affection, Eleanor marveled at the family who had chosen love, loyalty, and empathy over power and greed. Sarah raised her glass again. To Eleanor, she toasted, her voice thick with emotion, "Who taught us that it's never too late to stand up for yourself, no matter what." Mark's young daughter, Lily, who was perched on his lap, piped up, "And that good guys really do win sometimes." Eleanor felt tears welling in her eyes, tears of gratitude, of profound relief, and of overwhelming joy. The conversation flowed freely, laughter echoing through the house, nobody mentioning Arthur or Thomas, their presence simply irrelevant to this newfound happiness. Later, as the evening mellowed, Emily leaned in, her voice soft. Eleanor paused, surprised by the absolute certainty in her own voice when she answered. "I'm happier than I've been in decades, Emily," she affirmed, a deep sense of contentment settling over her. That same evening, after her family had left, Eleanor found a discreet envelope in her mailbox. It bore the insignia of the FBI. Inside, a formal letter outlined the culmination of their investigation. Serafina, whose true name was Zara Matsumoto, had been captured in Florida, attempting to marry yet another unsuspecting 70-year-old widower. She would be charged with multiple counts of fraud, elder abuse, and, significantly, in connection with the suspicious deaths of her previous husbands. Eleanor's meticulous records and her recorded evidence had been crucial in unraveling Serafina's decades-long criminal enterprise. Attached was a personal note from Agent Morales. It was brief but heartfelt, thanking Eleanor for her courage and resilience in fighting back. He wrote, "Your actions not only saved your own life but undoubtedly prevented future victims from falling prey to her schemes." Eleanor sat by the fireplace, the warmth a comforting embrace. She reflected on Morales's words. Bravery, she realized, wasn't the absence of fear, but the ability to feel terrified and act anyway. She had been afraid, truly afraid, but she had acted. And in doing so, she had reclaimed not just her assets, but her entire life. She was no longer just Arthur's wife or Thomas's mother. She was Eleanor Clark, a woman forged anew in the fires of betrayal, stronger and wiser than ever. Just then, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Thomas. "Mom," it read. "Thank you. I love you." Eleanor smiled, a soft, genuine smile that reached her eyes. She typed back her reply. "I love you too." And today wasn't hard, it was perfect. She knew there was a long road ahead for Thomas, one of recovery and redemption. But for her, the battle was won. Her victory wasn't in crushing Arthur or imprisoning Serafina. It was in the quiet satisfaction of a life reclaimed, a spirit unbroken. She closed her eyes, ready to embrace her new beginning, ready to simply enjoy being Eleanor Morrison.